They thought grief would make me weak. They thought the black dress meant surrender. When my husband accepted condolences like a crowned king beside my father's casket, I folded my hands, lowered my eyes, and waited for the sealed envelope no one else knew existed. The church smelled of lilies and polished wood, sweet, suffocating, ceremonial. My father would have hated that much perfume in one room. He used to say real power smelled like ink, coffee, and long nights at the office. Now the air was thick with whispers instead. I stood in the front row, fingers interlaced so tightly my knuckles burned. Across the aisle, board members from my father's company avoided my gaze. Not out of grief, out of calculation. Their eyes kept drifting to my husband, Daniel, tall, composed, receiving condolences as if they were congratulations. He wore charcoal, not black. Charcoal suggests transition. The first tremor of anger rose in my throat, hot and metallic. I swallowed it. Not today. The pastor's voice blurred into a distant hum. Words about legacy, leadership, impact. They floated above us like fragile glass ornaments, beautiful and breakable. I watched Daniel instead. His hand rested lightly on my back, steady, possessive, guiding me when I didn't need guidance. A subtle squeeze when someone important approached, a fraction tighter when the CFO stepped forward. Ownership disguised as comfort. Then it happened. Right there, beside the casket, someone from the board cleared his throat and said what they'd clearly rehearsed. Mr. Whitaker had always intended continuity. The company will remain strong under Daniel's leadership. Not if. Under. A few heads nodded. Someone murmured relief. A ripple moved through the pews, the sound of investors exhaling. I felt something shift inside me. Not shock, recognition. Because this wasn't spontaneous. This was choreography. Daniel inclined his head modestly. I'll honor my father-in-law's vision. Vision. The word almost made me smile. My father didn't believe in handing power to anyone who hadn't built it brick by brick. And Daniel? He had married into the blueprint. My mother dabbed her eyes beside me. She didn't know, or maybe she suspected, but chose peace over truth. Grief makes illusions easier to hold. As the service ended, people gathered in clusters, lawyers, executives, old rivals pretending to be friends. The atmosphere shifted from mourning to negotiation with breathtaking speed. That was when I saw him, at the back of the church, our estate attorney, gray suit, unshaken posture, a leather briefcase held with deliberate calm. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was watching me. A flicker of cold slid down my spine. Daniel noticed him too, but only briefly. His attention snapped back to a board member discussing transition plans. Transition. The word echoed louder than the church bells outside. I moved toward the attorney slowly, weaving through condolences that felt like static electricity against my skin. Each handshake lingered a second too long, as if people were measuring how much influence I still possessed. Mrs. Whitaker, someone whispered, almost pitying. Mrs. Not daughter. The attorney met me halfway. Whenever you're ready, he said quietly. Just that. No explanation. No performance. Daniel approached, smiling the smile he used in quarterly earnings calls. Is there something we need to address today? We. The attorney's gaze didn't shift from me. There is a sealed document your father instructed to be opened in your presence. Daniel's hand tightened at my waist. Sealed document. For a fraction of a second, the smallest crack, uncertainty crossed his face. It vanished almost instantly, replaced with polished calm. I assume that's procedural, he said smoothly. We can schedule it with the board. The attorney paused. No, it is not for the board. Silence expanded between us, thin and electric. I felt my pulse steady. Because now I understood. My father had never relied on noise. He relied on timing, and Daniel, for all his strategic brilliance, had forgotten one thing. My father had built empires by playing 3 moves ahead. The attorney adjusted his briefcase. "The reading will take place tomorrow morning." "Of course," Daniel replied, already recovering. "We'll handle everything appropriately." "We," again. I finally spoke. "I'll be there." 3 simple words, soft, even. But Daniel's eyes flicked to mine, searching for doubt, for fear, for weakness. He found none. The bells outside began to ring, loud and relentless, as if marking not the end of a life, but the beginning of something else entirely. As guests filtered out into the gray afternoon, I stood alone beside my father's casket for a final moment. His face was still, composed, almost amused. "You taught me to wait," I whispered under my breath. "So I did." Behind me, Daniel was already on the phone. Quiet, urgent, controlled. The board thought stability had been secured. The market would open on Monday expecting continuity. They believed the company, and $580 million, had already found its next king. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference between assumption and authority. And if you think this was the moment everything changed, you're already 1 step behind. The boardroom overlooked the city like a glass crown. All angles, light, and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline my father used to call a chessboard for adults. This was where deals were made, alliances forged, and sometimes quietly broken. The long walnut table gleamed under recessed lights, bottled water, legal pads, controlled breathing. Daniel stood at the head of the table before anyone officially invited him to. Not seated, standing, a subtle declaration. His suit was navy today, authority without aggression. He looked ready to lead. The board members filed in with expressions carefully calibrated between grief and pragmatism. Markets do not mourn. They reposition. I took my seat halfway down the table. Not at the head, not beside him, where executors sit. The estate attorney entered last, briefcase in hand, and placed it on the table with deliberate care. The faint click of the latches sounded louder than it should have. Conversations died mid-sentence. Sealed will. The words weren't spoken yet, but they filled the room like pressure before a storm. Daniel leaned forward. "Before we begin, I'd like to reassure everyone that operational continuity is intact. The transition plan my father-in-law and I discussed will ensure." The attorney raised one hand, not aggressively, simply precisely. "Mr. Whitaker left explicit instructions regarding the order of proceedings." A flicker, just a flicker. Daniel sat down. The attorney removed a thick envelope, ivory, unmarked, except for my father's unmistakable signature across the seal. The sight of it tugged something deep in my chest. Not grief, recognition. He'd always favored ink over email for what mattered most. "This document," the attorney began, "was executed and notarized 6 months ago. It supersedes any prior drafts." 6 months. That was before the hospital visits became frequent. Before Daniel began spending more evenings reviewing projections with the CFO, before the board started inviting him to private strategy dinners. The attorney broke the seal. The sound was soft, almost polite. Daniel folded his hands, expression calm, jaw tight. The first paragraphs were formalities, estate distributions, charitable foundations, asset allocations. Numbers rolled through the room like controlled detonations. Then came the company. "My controlling shares in Whitaker Global Holdings," the attorney read, voice steady, shall remain within the family under structured governance. Daniel exhaled subtly. Of course they would remain in the family. He was family. Operational leadership, the attorney continued, is to be reviewed under the terms outlined in Appendix C. A board member shifted in his seat. Appendix C? Daniel's fingers tapped once against the table before going still. The attorney turned the page. In the event of my passing, the sole executor of my estate and acting authority over all controlling shares shall be... The room inhaled. My daughter. Silence, not shocked silence, stunned silence. It landed heavily, like glass cracking in slow motion. Daniel did not move, but the color drained from his knuckles. The attorney continued without pause. Executor privileges include voting authority over all majority shares, approval rights over executive appointments, and discretionary review of existing leadership contracts. Existing leadership contracts. A quiet wave of realization spread around the table. Daniel finally spoke, carefully. That's procedural language. Executor does not necessarily imply operational control. The attorney met his gaze. In this case, it does. Another page turned. There is an additional clause, he said. The air shifted again. If at any time the executor determines that a conflict of interest exists within executive leadership, including marital relationships that may influence fiduciary responsibility, she has unilateral authority to suspend, audit, or restructure said leadership pending independent review. No one breathed. Conflict of interest, marital relationships. Daniel's composure didn't shatter. It thinned. He looked at me then, fully, directly, for the first time since the funeral. You knew, he said quietly. Not an accusation, a calculation. I held his gaze, calm, level. No, I replied truthfully. But he did. A board member cleared his throat. For clarity, are we to understand that Mrs. Whitaker has immediate controlling vote? The attorney nodded. Yes? Effective immediately. The power dynamic in the room pivoted so fast it was almost audible. Men who had spent years speaking over me were now watching me, waiting. Me, in black, silent, underestimated. Daniel straightened his tie. This doesn't change our strategic direction, he said, attempting to anchor the narrative. We move forward as planned. Forward, planned. I placed my palms flat on the table. The wood was cool beneath my skin. Actually, I said softly, we begin with transparency. A subtle tremor moved through the executives. Appendix C outlines a performance and compliance audit of all executive decisions made within the last 12 months, I continued, starting today. The CFO blinked. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You're implying misconduct, he said evenly. I'm fulfilling my fiduciary duty. Not revenge, not anger, duty. The attorney slid a document toward me, my signature line, waiting. The pen felt heavier than it should have. For a second, I saw my father across from me. Sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp, voice steady. Never react. Reposition. I signed. The sound of ink on paper echoed louder than any applause could have. Daniel leaned back slowly. You're making this adversarial. No, I said. I'm making it accountable. A board member spoke hesitantly. This could affect market confidence. Not if we handle it correctly, I replied. Transparency builds trust. Outside the windows, the city glinted under late morning light. Cars moved, deals continued. The world did not pause for power shifts, but it adjusted to them. Daniel's phone buzzed. He ignored it. For the first time since the funeral, he wasn't directing the room. He was reacting to it, and he hated that. The attorney closed the will carefully. There is one final instruction, he added. Every eye snapped back to him. In a separate sealed directive, mister. Whitaker requested that the executor review a set of private correspondence and financial records stored in the estate vault. Estate vault. Daniel's stillness became absolute. They are to be accessed by her alone. A quiet, precise fracture spread through the illusion Daniel had constructed over months. I stood. The movement was small, but definitive. We'll reconvene after the audit begins, I said. Thank you. Chairs scraped softly as people rose. Daniel remained seated for a moment longer. When he finally looked up at me, the warmth in his expression was gone. You're overestimating what you can handle, he murmured. I met his eyes. Am I? The question lingered between us like a live wire. Because somewhere inside that estate vault, in private correspondence and financial records no one else had seen, was something my father believed I needed. And if Daniel was worried, then I was finally looking in the right direction. If you think this was just about inheritance, you haven't seen what was hidden in ink. If you were in her place, would you have signed that audit immediately or waited? Tell me what you would have done. The estate vault wasn't inside a dramatic underground bunker or hidden behind a painting. It was worse. It was ordinary. A private bank suite on the 42nd floor of a steel and glass building downtown. Minimalist, quiet, almost sterile. The kind of place that doesn't look powerful, but holds the architecture of empires in climate-controlled drawers. Rain streaked the windows when I arrived. Thin, precise lines, like handwriting sliding down the sky. The receptionist greeted me by name. Not Mrs. Whitaker, by my first name. My father had arranged that. The estate attorney was already there, waiting near the secured door. He gave me a single nod, no commentary, no reassurance. You'll have privacy, he said. I'll remain outside. The vault door opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. Inside, it smelled faintly of paper and cold metal. Rows of deposit boxes lined the walls, each labeled with neutral codes. No names, no emotion, just numbers. The attendant retrieved one slim, matte black case and placed it on the central table. Authorized access confirmed. The door shut behind me. The click echoed. For a moment, I just stood there, not afraid, aware, because whatever my father had placed inside this box, he'd chosen me to see it, and me alone. I sat and opened it. Inside, 3 items: a leather-bound notebook, a sealed envelope, a flash drive. No dramatic folders, no stacks of accusation. Just restraint. I reached for the notebook first. The leather was worn, edges softened, used often. My father's handwriting filled the pages in deliberate, slanted ink. Not journaling, not sentiment, observations, dates, meetings, margins marked with small stars. The first entry I read was from 11 months ago. Dinner, Daniel plus CFO, private. Discussion deviated from quarterly focus. Unusual defensiveness when questioned. My pulse slowed instead of racing. Not shock, pattern recognition. Another page. Request for accelerated restructuring proposal. Timing inconsistent with market indicators. Another. Share movement flagged, legal but layered. Layered. My father never wrote unnecessary words. Each note was clean, surgical. He wasn't accusing, he was tracking. I turned a page and felt something inside me tighten. A photocopy was taped neatly into the notebook, a summary of internal share reallocations through shell subsidiaries. All technically compliant, all strategically subtle. The CFO's initials appeared repeatedly. So did Daniel's. A quiet chill slid down my spine. not fear, but the kind of cold clarity that arrives when the pieces finally begin to align. I set the notebook aside and picked up the sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in my father's hand. No flourish, just certainty. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you are reading this, then timing required precision. Trust him to make even a letter sound like a chess move. I built this company on patience and documentation. Emotion clouds judgment, paper clarifies it. I swallowed. If you ever find yourself questioning loyalty, do not confront, confirm. Truth does not require volume. My eyes burned, not with tears, but with something sharper, resolve. Daniel is ambitious. Ambition is not a flaw, but unchecked ambition corrodes structure. There it was, not condemnation, assessment. I have secured evidence sufficient to trigger independent review if necessary. It is not accusation. It is protection. You will know when to use it. My fingers tightened around the page. You are stronger than they calculate. They will mistake silence for weakness. Let them. The final line was underlined once. Control is quiet. I exhaled slowly. The flash drive lay beside the letter like a final punctuation mark. I inserted it into the secure terminal inside the vault. A folder opened. Correspondence archives, encrypted financial modeling drafts, internal strategy emails, and one subfolder labeled simply, Contingency. My heart did not race. It steadied. Inside were time-stamped communications between Daniel and the CFO outlining accelerated leadership consolidation plans, conditional upon health outcome scenarios. Health outcome scenarios. The language was clinical, detached, but the timing aligned precisely with my father's hospitalizations. There was no explicit crime, no smoking gun, but there was coordination, pre-positioning, a plan designed to appear organic while quietly shifting structural leverage. The brilliance of it almost impressed me. Almost. I leaned back in the chair, the soft hum of the vault's ventilation system filling the silence. Daniel hadn't poisoned anyone, hadn't forged signatures. He'd done something far more sophisticated. He'd prepared to inherit inevitability. Except my father had prepared too. And he had documented everything. The compliance audit I initiated this morning would now have direction, not accusation, not vengeance, direction. If irregularities surfaced under independent review, the board would have no choice but to reevaluate leadership alignment, not because I demanded it, because governance required it. A faint vibration startled me. My phone. Daniel. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then answered. How did the vault visit go? His voice was even, almost gentle. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Productive? A pause. I hope you're not letting grief distort things. I'm not grieving in the vault, Daniel. Silence again, thinner this time. You're escalating unnecessarily, he said. This could destabilize investor confidence. Transparency stabilizes it. You think the board will back you? I think the board will back documented evidence. His breathing shifted, just slightly. You're reading too much into isolated discussions. Am I? The same question I'd asked him yesterday. He didn't answer immediately. You don't want to make this a war, he said quietly. I closed the laptop. No, I agreed. I want to make it accurate. When I stepped out of the vault, the estate attorney studied my face carefully. You've found what you needed, he asked. Yes. Not revenge, not outrage, clarity. Outside, the rain had stopped, the city reflected in slick pavement, distorted, but intact. I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, alignment. Because Daniel had mistaken ambition for inevitability. And my father had left me something far more dangerous than anger: documentation. And the audit had just begun. By the time the audit team arrived, the building felt different, not louder, sharper. Conversations paused when I stepped off the elevator. Screens shifted too quickly. Assistants who once greeted Daniel first now recalculated the angle of their smiles. Power doesn't announce itself. It adjusts posture. The independent compliance firm set up in conference room B, neutral suits, neutral expressions, laptops aligned like instruments before surgery. Daniel watched from the far end of the corridor, hands in his pockets, the image of calm leadership. If anyone didn't know better, they would have assumed he had invited the scrutiny himself. He approached me with measured steps. "You could have discussed this privately," he said quietly. "We didn't need outsiders." "We needed independence," I replied. A muscle moved in his jaw. "You're implying misconduct." "I'm requesting verification." The distinction mattered, and he knew it. Inside the conference room, the lead auditor, a woman with silver-framed glasses and a voice like polished steel, outlined the scope. 12 months of executive decision-making, share movement analysis, compensation structures, strategic restructuring proposals. Every word landed precisely. Daniel took a seat across from her. "We operate transparently," he said smoothly. "You'll find nothing irregular." I believed him, in a way, because irregular and intentional are not the same. The audit began. Hours passed in the quiet clicking of keys and the soft shuffle of documents. The tension wasn't explosive. It was tensile, stretched thin, humming under the surface. Mid-afternoon, one of the auditors requested additional clarification on a set of pre-approved restructuring drafts. The CFO was summoned. He entered with practiced composure, though his tie sat slightly askew, an imperfection he would normally never allow. "These were scenario models," he explained. "Standard contingency planning." "Contingency for what?" the auditor asked. "Leadership transition." The room cooled by a degree. Daniel leaned forward. "Which is responsible governance." "Yes," the auditor agreed calmly, "though the timing of these drafts aligns closely with private health briefings not yet disclosed to the board. Silence, not accusation. Observation." I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. The CFO cleared his throat. "We anticipated market volatility and pre-positioned share consolidations accordingly," the auditor added. The word pre-positioned floated in the air. Daniel's tone remained even. "All movements were compliant." "Compliance is not the sole metric of fiduciary alignment," she replied. The conversation ended there, professionally, politely, but something had shifted. Later, in my office, the one that used to be my father's, I stood at the window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in late afternoon light, deceptively peaceful. Daniel entered without knocking. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. "With?" "With creating doubt." "I didn't create anything," I said. "I invited review." "You're risking everything he built." I turned to face him. "No, I'm protecting it." His expression hardened, not rage, not yet, but frustration edged with something else. "You think the board won't see this as personal?" "It isn't." A pause stretched between us. "Isn't it?" he pressed. There it was, the pivot, the suggestion that my actions were emotional, reactive, wounded. I walked past him toward the desk. "Personal would have been confrontation," I said quietly. "This is governance." He studied me as though recalculating a formula that no longer balanced. "You've changed," he said. "No," I replied. "I've stopped deferring." The words lingered longer than either of us expected. That evening, the lead auditor requested a private meeting, not with Daniel, with me. In the conference room, she placed a slim folder on the table. "We've identified coordinated timing between internal share reallocations and undisclosed medical projections," she said calmly. "Nothing illegal, but strategically advantageous." Advantageous. "To whom?" I asked. She met my gaze. "To your husband." The air didn't crack. It settled. "There's more," she continued. "Language in certain internal communications suggests expectation rather than contingency." Expectation? That word pressed heavier than all the others. "Can you quantify impact?" I asked. "Yes. If those consolidations had finalized without your father's final will structure, operational control would have effectively centralized under Daniel within 18 months. 18 months. The timeline was precise, not impulsive, designed. "And now?" I asked. She closed the folder. "Now the executor's authority supersedes that pathway." A quiet exhale escaped me. Not relief, confirmation. Daniel hadn't broken laws, he'd engineered inevitability. But inevitability depends on absence of resistance, and my father had anticipated resistance. That night, Daniel didn't come home until late. When he did, he stood in the doorway of our bedroom longer than usual. "You've made your point," he said finally. "This wasn't about a point. You could still stop this." I met his eyes across the dim room. "Why would I?" His answer didn't come immediately, because there wasn't one that didn't reveal too much. The next morning, the board received the preliminary audit summary. Carefully worded, professionally neutral, but impossible to ignore. A special governance session was scheduled, not to accuse, to evaluate leadership alignment. Daniel read the notice in silence. When he looked up, the certainty he'd worn like armor since the funeral was gone. In its place, calculation edged with doubt. "You're not going to remove me," he said quietly. I didn't respond, because this was never about removal. It was about exposure to light. And light changes everything. The special governance session was scheduled for 9 a.m. No press, no dramatic announcements, just 12 board members, legal counsel, the lead auditor, Daniel, and me. The sky that morning was painfully clear. Sunlight flooded the boardroom, dissolving shadows that usually softened hard expressions. There would be no hiding in dim corners today. Daniel arrived early. So did I. We didn't speak. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, a portrait of composure. Anyone walking in would see a leader under temporary scrutiny, not a man watching the architecture of his strategy shift. The board members took their seats with unusual restraint, no small talk, no performative condolences, only quiet anticipation. The estate attorney sat near the head of the table, near my father's chair, which now belonged to me. The lead auditor began with measured precision. "Our findings indicate no illegal activity," she stated clearly. "However, coordinated executive positioning tied to undisclosed health projections presents a material governance concern." Material governance concern? That phrase carried more weight than accusation. A board member leaned forward. "Clarify the concern?" Executive restructuring drafts and share reallocations were initiated prior to formal disclosure to the board regarding Mr. Whitaker's medical condition. The timing suggests strategic anticipation of leadership transition without collective oversight. The word oversight echoed. Daniel's voice remained calm. "We prepared responsibly. Markets punish hesitation." "And boards," another member replied quietly, "punish opacity." Silence settled like dust. I watched faces around the table. Men who had underestimated me weeks ago now studying balance sheets and legal clauses with renewed caution. Not because I demanded it, because the documentation demanded it. The estate attorney spoke next. As executor, she holds voting authority over controlling shares. Any determination regarding executive alignment rests within her discretion. All eyes shifted to me. The moment stretched. This could have been dramatic. It wasn't. Power rarely is. I folded my hands on the table, steady, deliberate. This company was built on long-term trust, I began. Not opportunistic acceleration. Daniel's gaze locked onto mine. You call it opportunistic, he said evenly. I call it prepared. Prepared for what? I asked softly. He didn't answer, because the answer required admitting expectation. A board member cleared his throat. We require stability. Public confidence cannot be compromised. Agreed, I said. I slid a document forward, a governance amendment drafted with the estate attorney the night before. Effective immediately, executive leadership will operate under enhanced oversight. Major strategic decisions require dual authorization, CEO and executor. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Daniel's jaw tightened. That undermines operational efficiency. It reinforces accountability, I replied. Another page followed. In addition, an independent compliance officer will be embedded within executive operations for 12 months. The CFO shifted in his seat. Daniel leaned back slowly. You're sidelining me? No, I said. I'm aligning you? The distinction mattered. He understood that, because this wasn't removal, it was exposure. Transparency leaves little room for quiet consolidation. A senior board member nodded thoughtfully. Given the findings, enhanced governance is prudent. Votes were cast, one by one, measured, unemotional. The amendment passed, not unanimously, but decisively. Daniel remained composed until the final vote registered. Then, for the first time since the funeral, something unguarded flickered across his face. Not anger, realization. The inevitability he'd engineered had dissolved, not in scandal, not in revenge, but in procedure. After the session adjourned, board members exited quietly. No spectacle, no headlines, just structural recalibration. Daniel stayed behind. The room felt larger without witnesses. You could have destroyed me, he said finally. I didn't want destruction. You wanted control. I met his gaze evenly. I wanted balance. A pause lingered. You don't trust me anymore, he said. Trust. Such a fragile word for something so measurable. I trust documentation, I replied. He let out a slow breath, not defeated, but contained. You'll be watching every move. Yes? A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. Your father would be proud. I didn't answer, because pride wasn't the goal. Integrity was. Weeks passed, markets stabilized. The audit concluded formally with recommendations implemented. Share movements froze under new review protocols. Executive decisions slowed, more deliberate, more transparent. Investors responded not with panic, but cautious approval. Headlines described it as a governance strengthening initiative. No scandal, no spectacle, just structure reinforced. One evening, I stood alone in my father's former office, the city lights flickering below like distant circuitry. The chair still felt unfamiliar, but it no longer felt borrowed. The estate attorney entered quietly. It's done, he said. For now, I replied. He gave a slight nod. Your father believed power should never depend on silence. I looked at the skyline. They mistook mine for weakness. He allowed himself the faintest smile. They won't again. After he left, I sat at the desk and opened the leather notebook once more. My father's final handwritten line caught the light. Control is quiet. Daniel still held the title of CEO, but now every decision flowed through clarity, through oversight, through me, not as vengeance, not as retaliation, but as lawful authority. At my father's funeral, they thought the story had ended. They thought grief had made me smaller. They thought inheritance meant transfer. They were wrong. Inheritance means responsibility. And responsibility, when executed correctly, reshapes everything without raising its voice. Outside, the city pulsed steadily. Inside, the structure stood firmer than ever. And this time, everyone knew exactly who was watching.